Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss the most thrilling stories on this channel. Now, let's begin. The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the streets of the city into a blurred reflection of neon lights and shattered dreams. In the heart of it all, Dominic, the boss, Romano sat in his office, the faint hum of the city outside barely piercing the heavy silence of the room. He had always been a man of control, a figure feared and respected in the underground world of organized crime. Deals, betrayals, and power struggles were his daily bread. Yet, nothing in his 38 years of life had prepared him for the voice that would soon invade his carefully ordered world. It started with a phone call. A call that would shake the foundations of his empire and leave him questioning everything he thought he knew. Dominic answered with his usual clipped tone, expecting perhaps a tip about a rival, or a problem with one of his operations. But the voice on the other end was neither threat nor demand. It was soft, trembling, yet utterly piercing. "Dominic, you have to listen, she's in danger," the voice whispered. And then silence. For a man like Dominic, who had faced guns, betrayal, and violence without flinching, the chill that ran down his spine was unusual. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing as he tried to place the voice. Familiar, somehow, yet hauntingly strange. "Who is this?" He barked into the phone, but there was no answer, just the faint static of a line that had gone dead. The rest of the evening passed in uneasy tension. Dominic couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. His instincts, honed by years of survival in a world where one misstep could cost lives, screamed that this wasn't just another threat. It was a warning tied to someone he hadn't thought about in years. Her name, though unspoken, echoed in the corners of his mind. And with it, memories he had buried deep, memories of a woman who had once walked into his life and shattered the cold walls around his heart. Her name was Isabella Marquez. A name that had haunted his dreams, a woman who had the rare audacity to challenge him, to see through the steel mask he wore for the world. She had disappeared from his life without explanation, leaving only fragments of her laughter and the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. Dominic had tried to forget, but some ghosts never leave, and some mistakes never fade. Now, years later, her presence, or the hint of it, was returning like a storm he couldn't predict. He moved through his mansion with the precision of a man who controlled everything, yet tonight, his control felt fragile, almost laughably insufficient. Calls were traced, men were questioned, and every network in his empire was scanned for leads, but nothing made sense. No one had seen her, no one had heard from her. Yet the call had been real. And she was in danger. Dominic's mind raced. Who would threaten Isabella? Why now? And most importantly, why had no one thought to tell him sooner? He had spent years building walls around his life, his emotions, and his heart, but something about this call broke through every one of them. He realized with a sinking feeling that this wasn't just about business. This was personal. Hours passed in restless pacing, Dominic's thoughts consumed by her image. He remembered her eyes, bright and fearless, how she had stared down men far larger and far crueler than him. She had a way of seeing the truth in a person, stripping them bare of their masks. And Dominic, the man who had never allowed anyone close, had found himself disarmed by her mere presence. As the first light of dawn crept into the city, Dominic made a decision. He couldn't wait for the danger to come to her, or to him. He needed to find her. And he needed to do it before it was too late. He didn't know where to start, only that this journey would take him into shadows he had avoided for years, and force him to confront secrets he had long buried. Little did he know, Isabella had changed too. The woman who had once captivated him was now a mystery wrapped in danger, and she was running from forces more ruthless than even Dominic had faced. And somewhere in the dark corners of the city, those forces were closing in, unaware that the very man they feared most was about to intervene. Dominic picked up his phone again, dialing numbers only whispered about in the corridors of power. He needed information, allies, and answers. But deep down, he knew that no amount of intelligence or strategy could prepare him for the storm that Isabella represented. She was more than a woman in danger. She was the key to a reckoning he hadn't even imagined, a reckoning that would challenge his empire, his heart, and everything he thought he controlled. As the city awoke, unaware of the storm brewing in its shadows, Dominic Romano made a promise, to himself and to the woman who haunted him, that he would stop at nothing. Nothing. The first step was simple: find her. The next steps, however, would test the limits of his power, his patience, and his soul. And so, the hunt began. The city had a way of swallowing people whole, hiding them in plain sight among the millions of faces that moved like currents in its veins. Dominic knew that finding Isabella wouldn't be easy. She was clever, resourceful, and unpredictable, the kind of woman who didn't just disappear, she vanished. Every informant, every connection he contacted brought the same frustrating response. No one had seen her, no one had heard from her, and some even pretended ignorance, perhaps out of fear. But Dominic was relentless. He had built an empire on persistence, and he wasn't about to let this woman, this ghost from his past, slip through his fingers again. He started at the places she had been known to frequent years ago. Luxury cafes tucked away in forgotten corners of the city, art galleries where she had lingered for hours staring at paintings as if searching for hidden messages, and quiet bookshops where the scent of old paper and ink clung to the air. Each location was a memory, a breadcrumb trail that pulled at him, stirring a mixture of longing and frustration. He asked questions with his usual blend of charm and authority, the men and women he interrogated sensing immediately that this was no ordinary search. There was urgency in his tone, a weight that made people tell the truth, or at least the closest version of it they could. Yet every lead ended in a dead end. Isabella had left no trace. Hours turned into days. Dominic rarely slept, surviving on coffee, adrenaline, and the gnawing need to find her before it was too late. He began retracing old acquaintances, people connected to her past, friends she had trusted. Some were helpful, others suspicious. One man, a small-time hustler, hesitated so long that Dominic's patience snapped. "You will tell me what you know," he said sharply, his gaze cold and unwavering. The man swallowed hard, eyes darting nervously, before finally whispering, She left the city. Maybe even the country. And she's not alone." Those words hit Dominic like a hammer. Someone else was involved. Someone powerful enough to force her into hiding. He didn't need to ask questions. He knew instinctively that this wasn't a random act of danger, it was calculated, deliberate, and personal. Dominic's mind raced as he pieced together the fragments of information. Who wanted Isabella? Why now? And how had they managed to evade even him, a man who controlled entire territories with a precision that bordered on obsession? He called in favors, sending trusted lieutenants to corners of the city where shadows gathered and secrets were currency. Every report, every observation, began forming a picture that was both alarming and chilling. She had enemies, yes, but not ordinary enemies. These were people who understood her worth, her intelligence, and her unpredictability. They feared her, but they also desired control over her, control that Dominic knew he would never allow. Meanwhile, Isabella was moving as if she could sense the pursuit. She had been on the run for days, carrying only essentials in a small, worn leather bag. Her usual confidence was tempered by caution, but even in the midst of danger, there was an undeniable grace in the way she moved. Every alleyway, every shadowed street, every taxi she hailed was chosen with precision. She wasn't just surviving, she was calculating, adapting, and preparing for something she wasn't ready to fully understand. And through it all, there was the voice from the past, the one she had tried to forget but could not. Dominic. The memory of him lingered like a stubborn echo, a reminder that some connections couldn't be severed, no matter the distance or time. Back in his penthouse, Dominic reviewed the intelligence gathered so far. His mind was a battlefield of emotions, anger at those who dared threaten her, frustration at the lack of concrete leads, and a gnawing worry that time was slipping away. He couldn't ignore the feeling that every second she spent on the run increased the risk. He also knew, with a certainty that surprised even him, that he wasn't searching for her merely out of obligation or guilt. There was something deeper, something primal that compelled him forward. He cared, more than he had ever allowed himself to care for anyone. Dominic's phone rang again late that night. A private line. He answered instantly, expecting another cryptic warning or perhaps a taunt from the shadowy figures manipulating her fate. But it wasn't a warning this time. It was Isabella's voice, clear, but shaky. "Dominic, I don't know who to trust anymore," she said. Hearing her name spoken that way, the fear, the uncertainty, knocked the wind out of him. He felt an ache he hadn't acknowledged in years, a vulnerability he had buried beneath layers of authority and ruthlessness. "I'll find you," he said, his voice firm but trembling with urgency. "No one will touch you." Not while I'm breathing. She paused, a faint sob escaping her. They're closer than you think. You don't know what they're capable of. Dominic's heart pounded. He had faced killers, betrayers, and mercenaries, yet he felt an unfamiliar fear, not for himself, but for her. Isabella had always been resourceful, but now she was fighting something far more insidious. He promised himself that he would descend into whatever darkness awaited, confront every danger, and do whatever it took to protect her. The call ended abruptly, leaving Dominic staring at the phone, mind racing with strategies. He began organizing a search with military-like precision, tapping into old contacts and surveillance networks. He analyzed every city street, every possible escape route, and every person who could be involved. Nothing was too small, no detail too trivial. Every movement, every clue mattered. Dominic knew this hunt would test not only his power and patience but also his ability to confront old emotions he had carefully repressed. As dawn broke over the city, Isabella moved through an abandoned warehouse district, unaware that Dominic's reach extended into places most thought untouchable. She had sensed that she wasn't alone, but she hadn't realized the depth of the storm about to descend. And Dominic, fueled by a mix of obsession, fear, and care, was closing in, guided not only by his intelligence network but by something less tangible, a connection that had survived years of silence and distance. By nightfall, Dominic had compiled a list of potential locations, each with risks and unknown variables. He wasn't merely searching, he was preparing for confrontation. Every step he took was calculated, balancing urgency with strategy. He knew that whoever was holding Isabella in danger had underestimated the lengths he would go to, and he intended to exploit that underestimation fully. In a quiet moment, Dominic allowed himself a rare reflection. He realized that Isabella had changed him in ways no threat or alliance ever had. She had touched something raw and human inside him, something that no empire, no title, and no reputation could shield. And now, with her life on the line, that part of him, the part that could feel, care, and even fear, was driving every decision. And so, the hunt intensified. The city, unaware of the storm brewing in its shadows, continued its relentless rhythm, but Dominic Romano had one focus: find Isabella Marquez. Protect her, and ensure that whoever dared to threaten her learned, in the most undeniable way, that Dominic's empire was not only vast but unyielding when it came to the one woman who had ever haunted his heart. The stage was set, the pieces were in motion, and the dangerous game had only just begun. The night air was thick with tension as Dominic Romano moved through the city streets, his mind a whirlwind of strategies and contingency plans. Every light that flickered in the distance, every shadow that stretched across the pavement seemed like a potential clue, or a trap. He had learned over the years that danger often disguised itself in the ordinary, and nothing could be overlooked. Every decision he made, every movement he orchestrated, was precise, calculated, and lethal if necessary. Yet beneath his careful composure, there was an urgency that bordered on obsession. Isabella was out there, somewhere, and time was slipping away with every heartbeat. Meanwhile, Isabella's world had contracted into a series of narrow corridors, hidden motels, and crowded subway stations where anonymity was her only protection. Her mind raced constantly, cataloging possibilities, memorizing exits, observing every passerby. She had learned to trust no one, to assume every gesture or glance could conceal danger. Yet there was one thought she couldn't escape: Dominic. The memory of him, his intensity, his voice, the way his presence seemed to dominate a room, haunted her. Even now, despite the peril that surrounded her, she felt a strange, impossible pull toward him. A part of her wondered if he was still alive, if he was searching for her, if he would come before it was too late. Dominic's network had begun to yield fragments of information. Surveillance footage from gas stations, traffic cams, and social media posts revealed glimpses of a woman matching Isabella's description moving through the city in patterns that suggested evasion and careful planning. Dominic analyzed each frame with relentless focus, cross-referencing locations, times, and potential routes. Every pattern, every movement, every slight anomaly was a thread to be followed, a clue to the labyrinth in which she was hiding. And as the puzzle slowly came together, a picture began to emerge. Isabella was being hunted, not randomly, but deliberately. Someone powerful wanted her found, and their motives were more dangerous than Dominic had anticipated. As the hours turned into a tense dawn, Dominic felt a rare pang of frustration. He had faced assassins, traitors, and rivals who plotted against him for power, money, or revenge. Yet nothing in his experience had prepared him for the thought of Isabella in danger. The fear for her life was unlike any threat he had encountered. It cut deeper, sharper, more personal. Every decision, every action, was now driven not by strategy alone but by a raw, uncontainable need to protect her. He realized that, for the first time, someone else's life mattered more than his empire, more than his reputation, more than himself. Isabella's path led her to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. She had followed rumors of a temporary safehouse, guided by incomplete directions and instinct. The building was silent, looming, a relic of forgotten industry. She slipped inside cautiously, listening to the echo of her own footsteps, her heart pounding as if it could betray her location. Every shadow seemed alive, every corner a potential threat. Yet she forced herself to calm, reminding herself that panic was a luxury she could not afford. She needed a plan. She needed options. She needed Dominic, though she didn't yet know if he was still searching, or if he even wanted to find her. Dominic, however, was closing in faster than she realized. His instincts, honed over decades of navigating the underworld, guided him through a web of leads and misdirections. He had assembled a small, trusted team to assist him, men and women who had never failed him before. Together, they moved like shadows, silent and precise, gathering information and following every hint of Isabella's trail. The city, oblivious to the silent storm, carried on with its endless noise and movement, unaware that a dangerous game was unfolding in its depths. Inside the warehouse, Isabella began to sense that her solitude was fleeting. She noticed subtle signs, footsteps too deliberate to be hers, a faint shift in the air, the distant sound of a vehicle idling. Her pulse quickened, but she remained poised. She had survived threats before, but this felt different. The danger was intelligent, calculating, and relentless. Whoever was after her had resources, skill, and knowledge of her movements that bordered on prescience. She realized she was facing a predator who didn't just hunt, they planned meticulously, and she was merely a piece in a larger game. Dominic's approach was methodical. He had narrowed the location to the warehouse district based on analysis of recent sightings, traffic patterns, and the type of building that would suit someone trying to hide. He walked through the darkened streets with a controlled urgency, communicating silently with his team via earpieces. Every shadow was scrutinized, every movement interpreted, every possibility considered. And then, in the corner of his vision, he caught sight of a figure slipping into a large, abandoned building. His heart skipped, not with fear, but with recognition. He knew it was her. Isabella. Inside, Isabella crouched behind a stack of crates, trying to remain unseen. She had sensed a presence growing closer, an almost intangible shift in the atmosphere, and her instincts told her it was not the enemies she feared, but someone else. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more dangerous than the last. And then, a voice, low, commanding, yet unmistakably familiar, broke the tense silence. Isabella. The sound of her name spoken by him made her heart leap, a mix of relief, confusion, and something deeper she had long denied. Dominic emerged from the shadows, moving with cautious precision, eyes locked on her. He raised his hands slightly, not in surrender but as a signal that he meant no immediate harm. Isabella studied him, her body tense, every muscle ready to react. "Dominic," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of recognition and fear. "You shouldn't be here." She cut herself off, realizing she couldn't explain the full extent of the danger without revealing vulnerabilities. "I know," Dominic interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "And I don't care. I'm not leaving until I know you're safe." There was a conviction in his tone that left no room for argument. Isabella's eyes searched his, looking for any trace of deception, any indication that he might be another threat. But she saw only certainty, and something she hadn't expected, care. Genuine, undeniable care. Before they could speak further, a sudden noise outside the warehouse shattered the brief moment of connection. Tires screeched, voices shouted, and the unmistakable presence of danger made itself known. Dominic's instincts kicked in immediately. He moved toward Isabella, shielding her with his body, scanning for exits and points of attack. The danger was closer than either of them had realized, and there was no time for hesitation. "Stay close," Dominic commanded, his voice low and authoritative. Isabella followed, trusting him despite the chaos, her survival instincts guiding her to rely on him. They navigated the labyrinth of crates and machinery, moving silently but swiftly, every step calculated to avoid detection. Dominic's mind raced with contingency plans, analyzing routes, estimating response times, and preparing for confrontation. He had faced countless ambushes before, but this one carried a personal edge that sharpened his senses to an almost unbearable degree. As they reached a side exit, Dominic paused, his gaze sweeping the surrounding darkness. "We're not safe yet," he warned. "But I've got you. Just trust me." Isabella nodded, her heart pounding not only with fear but with an emotion she couldn't yet name. Relief, hope, something stronger, more primal. She didn't have time to dissect it. The sound of approaching danger spurred them forward, and together they disappeared into the night, shadows among shadows, hunted and yet unbroken. The city continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware that two lives were now intertwined by fate, danger, and an unspoken connection neither could ignore. Dominic and Isabella had found each other again, but the storm surrounding them was far from over. Whoever was after her was persistent, intelligent, and ruthless, and now that Dominic was involved, the stakes had escalated. The next steps would demand courage, strategy, and the willingness to confront both external threats and internal truths they had long avoided. And so, as the night deepened and the city's lights flickered, Dominic Romano and Isabella Marquez began a journey that would test every limit, of trust, of power, and of the unspoken bond that had survived years of separation. The hunt had intensified, the danger was real, and neither would emerge unscathed. The city's streets, slick with rain and glinting under flickering streetlights, felt more dangerous than ever as Dominic and Isabella moved through the shadows. Every corner, every alley, every car parked haphazardly along the streets could conceal an enemy, or a trap. Dominic's eyes scanned constantly, muscles tensed, every sense alert. He knew the people hunting Isabella were meticulous, calculating, and deadly, and he had no intention of underestimating them. The moment they slipped into the night, his mind shifted into full tactical mode, formulating escape routes, fallback points, and contingencies for every possible ambush. But even as he planned, there was a tension that gnawed at him. This wasn't just a game of survival, it was a test of everything he had avoided facing in years, the depth of his feelings for her. Isabella followed close behind, moving with the fluid precision of someone who had learned to survive by relying on instincts and quick thinking. Her mind was racing, torn between relief at seeing Dominic and terror at the thought of what, or who, was pursuing her. She had been running for days, evading threats that seemed to anticipate her every move, and the realization that Dominic had found her both comforted and frightened her. He was powerful, yes, but bringing him into her flight meant increasing the danger not just to herself, but to him. Every step they took together was a delicate balance between trust and caution, hope and fear. They ducked into a narrow, dimly lit alleyway, the echoes of their footsteps swallowed by the city's ambient noise. Dominic kept a hand near his sidearm, his eyes flicking to every shadow and movement. He spoke quietly, deliberately, ensuring his tone was both authoritative and reassuring. "We're not out of this yet," he said, scanning the rooftops and fire escapes. "They know we're here. They've been tracking you for a while. I need you to stay close, follow my lead, and trust me completely." Isabella nodded, her pulse racing. She had survived threats before, but never with anyone watching her back so completely, so relentlessly. There was a strange comfort in knowing someone was willing to fight for her life, even if that someone was the man she had once thought she would never see again. Dominic's thoughts flickered to the call he had received days earlier, the mysterious warning that had set this hunt in motion. Whoever had contacted him had known enough to trigger the fear that had haunted him since. He didn't know whether the call was a friend, a foe, or someone with their own agenda, but it had been the spark that ignited his search. Now, moving through the streets with Isabella at his side, he realized that the danger surrounding her was more complex than he had first imagined. There were layers, connections, and motives that required careful navigation. And failure was not an option. Isabella tried to speak, but words caught in her throat. "Dominic, she began, but he shook his head. "Not now," he said firmly, his eyes scanning the alley. "We talk when we're safe. Right now, survival comes first." She swallowed, forcing herself to comply. She had learned the hard way that in moments like this, impatience could be fatal. Her body, trained to respond instinctively, followed his lead, and together they moved with quiet precision, slipping past the watchful eyes of unseen pursuers. The warehouse district was a maze of abandoned factories and crumbling buildings. Dominic had chosen it deliberately, knowing that the labyrinthine structures could provide temporary cover and multiple exit points. He led Isabella through narrow corridors, up stairwells coated in years of dust, and across rusted catwalks suspended above empty spaces. Every step was measured, every decision calculated to avoid detection. And yet, despite the careful planning, the tension was palpable. Each sound, a distant clang, the hum of a generator, a scuff of a foot, set their nerves on edge, reminding them that danger was never far behind. As they paused to catch their breath in a shadowed alcove, Isabella's eyes met Dominic's. "Why me?" she asked softly, her voice trembling with the weight of fear and confusion. "Why are you risking so much for me?" Dominic looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, with a quiet intensity, he said, "Because I can't not. Because you're the only thing that matters right now. And because anyone who thinks they can harm you without facing me is gravely mistaken." His words carried a mixture of promise and warning, leaving Isabella stunned. She had never expected such honesty, such vulnerability, from a man who had always seemed untouchable, unyielding, and merciless. Before she could respond, the distant roar of an engine broke the fragile moment. Dominic's eyes narrowed. "They've found us," he muttered, moving swiftly to guide Isabella toward another exit. The sound grew louder, the engine cutting through the silence like a knife. Dominic pushed her toward a narrow doorway leading to the roof of one of the buildings. "Up there," he whispered. "It's risky, but it's our best chance." Isabella followed, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and adrenaline. She had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, every instinct screamed that Dominic's plan, though dangerous, was their only hope. The rooftop offered a precarious vantage point over the surrounding buildings and streets. Dominic crouched low, scanning the area for movement. Below them, figures emerged from the shadows, moving with coordinated precision. They were not ordinary criminals or opportunists, these were trained operatives, skilled and disciplined. Dominic's mind raced, assessing their numbers, positions, and likely tactics. He had faced formidable opponents before, but the thought of Isabella's life hanging in the balance added a new intensity to his calculations. Every decision, every movement, was now critical. Isabella clung close, her body pressed against his side as he prepared to confront the threat. She had feared danger, but now, standing beside Dominic, she realized the depth of her reliance on him, and the complexity of the emotions that had returned with his presence. There was fear, yes, but also an undeniable sense of safety, even amidst chaos. And beneath that, a thread of something deeper, something that had survived years of separation, connection. Dominic signaled to Isabella to stay low and quiet. He moved with the precision of a predator, positioning himself to protect her while also gaining the upper hand. The operatives below began scanning the area, unaware of the roof above. Dominic's mind raced, anticipating their moves, preparing countermeasures, and calculating the precise timing required to neutralize the threat. Every moment was a test of nerves, strategy, and instinct. He could feel the weight of the world pressing down, yet every fiber of his being was focused on one objective, Isabella's survival. A sudden movement caught Dominic's eye, a shadow shifting against the far wall. He recognized it immediately. One of the operatives had spotted their position. Dominic's voice cut through the air, low and commanding. "Now," and with that, the chase escalated into a deadly dance across rooftops, narrow ledges, and fire escapes. Dominic moved with lethal grace, neutralizing threats with precision while ensuring Isabella remained safe. Her trust in him, though hesitant at first, proved invaluable as she followed his lead, responding to his cues with instinctive precision. By the time they reached the edge of the district, breathing heavily and hearts pounding, Dominic allowed himself a moment to glance at Isabella. She was shaken, yes, but alive. And that, for him, was enough, for now. Yet he knew this was only the beginning. The forces hunting her were relentless, and each encounter would grow more dangerous, more calculated, and more personal. As they disappeared into the safety of the city's shadows, Dominic couldn't shake the thought that this was more than a simple rescue. This was a battle, a reckoning, and a test of every skill, instinct, and emotion he had ever possessed. And Isabella, despite the danger, had become a force in his life he could not ignore, a light in the darkness that demanded protection at all costs. The night closed around them, a temporary reprieve from the storm that was gathering, both in the city and within their hearts. The hunt continued, the danger loomed, and the connection between them grew stronger, fueled by fear, adrenaline, and something neither was ready to fully confront. And so, as the city slept unaware of the storm brewing in its shadows, Dominic Romano and Isabella Marquez pressed forward, bound by survival, trust, and an unspoken bond that promised both salvation and peril in equal measure. The city never truly slept, and tonight its heartbeat seemed louder than ever, pulsing through the streets like a warning. Dominic and Isabella moved cautiously, their shadows merging with the darkness as they navigated the labyrinth of alleyways and forgotten streets. The narrow passages and dimly lit corners offered temporary concealment, but Dominic knew better than to trust luck alone. Danger lingered around every corner, a silent predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His mind was a storm of calculations, contingency plans, and anticipation of every possible threat. Isabella's safety was his singular focus, and he would not allow anything, or anyone, to take her from him. Isabella followed silently, each step deliberate, each breath controlled. Her nerves were taut, a constant reminder that the forces hunting her were still in pursuit. She had trusted Dominic before, though briefly, and that trust had always been tested. But tonight, she felt something more, a certainty, born of experience and instinct, that he would protect her. Yet even as they moved together, a gnawing fear persisted. Whoever was after her was relentless, and their intentions were more sinister than she had first imagined. She wondered how far they would go, what lengths they would take, and whether Dominic could truly shield her from a threat that seemed to anticipate their every move. The call that had started this chain of events had been cryptic, but Dominic had followed its trail with meticulous precision. Every lead, every hint, had guided him closer to her. Now, as they moved through the deserted streets, he realized that their pursuers were no ordinary criminals. Their movements were coordinated, precise, and calculated, professional, in every sense of the word. Dominic's eyes scanned the rooftops and fire escapes, his senses heightened, every instinct screaming that the danger was closing in. He had faced countless enemies in his life, but this threat carried a personal edge, a cunning that challenged even his experience. Suddenly, a sound shattered the tense silence, a metallic clang echoing from an adjacent alleyway. Dominic froze, his muscles coiling like a spring, eyes locking onto the source. Isabella's breath caught in her throat as she sensed the shift in his demeanor. "Move," he whispered, his voice low but commanding, guiding her into the shadows. The sound repeated, closer this time, deliberate, as if the enemy was testing them, toying with them, letting them know they were being watched. Dominic's hand brushed Isabella's arm, a silent signal to stay alert. Every movement, every decision in the coming moments would determine whether they survived the night. They ducked behind a stack of crates, bodies pressed to the cold, damp concrete. Dominic's mind raced, analyzing the situation with the precision of a seasoned strategist. He calculated the angles of attack, potential escape routes, and the weaknesses of their pursuers. He could see the shadows moving with intent, coordinated and methodical, but he was already anticipating their moves. Dominic had faced ambushes before, yes, but never with Isabella's life so directly entwined with the outcome. The stakes had never been higher, and failure was not an option. Isabella tried to steady her breathing, focusing on the rhythm of Dominic's movements. She had learned to trust her instincts, but even instincts had limits. The fear that had accompanied her since the first threatening call had transformed into a mix of adrenaline and determination. She couldn't let panic take control, not now. Her eyes scanned their surroundings, noting potential exits, hiding places, and obstacles. She followed Dominic's lead, moving in tandem with him, a silent acknowledgement that survival required absolute coordination. Dominic's gaze swept the alley once more, locking onto a group of figures emerging from the shadows. They were close, too close, and their intentions were unmistakable. Dominic's hand rested near his weapon, ready to act, while his mind calculated the best course of action. The operatives moved with confidence, unaware that Dominic's experience far exceeded theirs. They had underestimated him, and that mistake could cost them everything. With a barely perceptible signal, Dominic guided Isabella toward a narrow stairwell leading to a fire escape. The metal groaned under their weight, but it offered a vantage point and a temporary reprieve from the immediate threat. As they ascended, Dominic's mind reviewed every potential outcome. He considered the motivations behind the pursuit, the resources at their disposal, and the traps that might lie ahead. Isabella's safety was paramount, but he also knew that understanding the enemy's strategy could turn the tide in their favor. Whoever orchestrated this hunt had underestimated Dominic's ability to adapt, to anticipate, and to fight with calculated ferocity. Every step brought them closer to temporary safety, yet every shadow reminded him that the danger was relentless, patient, and cunning. Isabella's heart pounded as they reached the rooftop. She looked at Dominic, her eyes searching his for reassurance, for a sign that he would protect her no matter what came next. "Dominic, what if they catch us?" she whispered, voice trembling. He turned to her, expression hard but eyes softening with an unspoken promise. "They won't," he said firmly. "Not while I'm here. You'll see, they made a mistake thinking you could be touched without consequence." There was an intensity in his tone that left no room for doubt, a commitment that transcended words. Isabella felt a flicker of hope, tempered by the reality of the night's dangers. The city stretched out before them, a sea of lights and shadows, and Dominic scanned the horizon for any sign of movement. Below, the operatives regrouped, speaking in hushed, urgent tones, unaware that their quarry had temporarily escaped their grasp. Dominic studied them, noting patterns, weaknesses, and opportunities. He was preparing for the next confrontation, anticipating the enemy's next move with the meticulous precision that had made him a feared figure in the criminal world. Isabella remained close, trusting him implicitly, understanding that survival required both courage and absolute faith in his abilities. Hours passed, and the night deepened. Dominic and Isabella moved through a series of safe points, each chosen for strategic advantage, concealment, and accessibility. Every step was deliberate, every pause calculated. The danger was omnipresent, yet Dominic's determination never wavered. He had faced threats that sought to dismantle his empire, betrayals that aimed to destroy him, and violence that would have crushed lesser men. Yet the thought of Isabella in danger, the knowledge that her life hung in the balance, drove him to act with a focus sharper than ever before. Isabella's thoughts drifted, fleetingly, to the past, to memories she had tried to bury. She remembered Dominic as he had been, commanding, fearless, and enigmatic. Yet now, in the midst of danger, she saw another side of him. A side that cared, that fought not for power or revenge, but for her. It unsettled her, yet it also drew her closer. Trust, fear, hope, and an unspoken connection wove together into a complex tapestry, binding them in ways neither fully understood. The temporary reprieve ended abruptly. The operatives had discovered their route, and the chase intensified. Dominic guided Isabella down a series of fire escapes, across narrow ledges, and through hidden alleyways, every movement designed to evade capture and ensure her safety. The city became a living maze, the shadows both ally and adversary, and Dominic's mind worked with relentless precision to stay ahead of the threat. Every corner turned, every step taken, was a testament to experience, strategy, and the unbreakable resolve to protect the woman who had unknowingly claimed a piece of his heart. By dawn, they found temporary shelter in an abandoned loft, a vantage point that allowed Dominic to plan the next phase of their survival. They were exhausted, physically and mentally, but alive. Dominic checked every window, every door, and every potential entry point. Isabella, though trembling, felt a sense of temporary security, a momentary pause in the relentless pursuit. Yet both knew this was only the beginning. The enemies were persistent, intelligent, and ruthless. The game had escalated, and the stakes were higher than ever. As the first light of day filtered through cracked windows, Dominic sat beside Isabella, speaking softly but firmly. "We've made it this far, but it's not over," he said. "They will keep coming, and we have to be ready." Together, Isabella nodded, understanding both the danger and the unspoken depth of his commitment. In that moment, amidst the uncertainty and fear, a bond strengthened, forged in the crucible of peril and shared determination. And so, as the city awoke, unaware of the deadly hunt unfolding in its shadows, Dominic Romano and Isabella Marquez prepared for the next phase. The enemies were relentless, the stakes were high, and every decision could mean the difference between survival and disaster. But for Dominic, for Isabella, and for the bond that had reawakened between them, giving up was never an option. The hunt was far from over. The danger was growing, and the night had proven that survival required courage, strategy, and the unbreakable will to protect those who mattered most. The city skyline glowed faintly against the pre-dawn mist, but Dominic Romano's world was consumed by shadows, danger, and the single thought that Isabella's life was still at risk. Sleep had abandoned him long ago, replaced by the sharp edge of vigilance and an unrelenting need to anticipate every move of the people hunting her. His mind was a battlefield of possibilities, streets, alleys, escape routes, vantage points, all meticulously mapped in his memory. He had faced countless threats before, but this was different. This was personal. Every instinct screamed that whoever pursued Isabella was clever, patient, and deadly, and they wouldn't stop until they achieved their objective. Dominic's hand hovered over his sidearm as he scanned the streets below their temporary loft hideout. He couldn't afford mistakes, not now. Not with her life in the balance. Isabella watched him, quietly observing his meticulous movements. Despite the exhaustion etched into her body and the lingering fear that clung to her like a shadow, there was a strange reassurance in Dominic's presence. She had learned to rely on herself, to trust her instincts, to move quickly and survive threats she couldn't always see. Yet with Dominic, that instinctual caution mingled with a new sense of possibility, an understanding that, for the first time in a long while, she wasn't alone. The realization brought both comfort and unease. She couldn't afford vulnerability, not with predators so close. And yet, despite her fear, she trusted him with a depth that surprised even her. The morning passed in tense silence. Dominic methodically scanned reports from his team, analyzing every known contact, every potential safehouse, and every possible threat vector. The operatives hunting Isabella were no amateurs. They were disciplined, coordinated, and terrifyingly resourceful. Each lead Dominic uncovered suggested a network of power and influence extending far beyond the city. He realized that whoever had targeted Isabella was not acting on whim or chance. They had a plan, and they were determined to see it through. He had faced empires built on violence before, but this felt different, more personal, more deliberate. Every step he took had to be precise, every decision deliberate, or the consequences could be fatal. Isabella sat across from him, hands clasped tightly, eyes darting occasionally to the window, as though she could sense the world outside closing in. Dominic noticed the tension in her posture, the subtle way she flinched at minor sounds, and it hardened his resolve. He had faced death countless times, had stared down mercenaries and rivals, yet nothing had tested him like this. Protecting Isabella required more than power or influence. It demanded vigilance, intuition, and a willingness to confront dangers he hadn't anticipated. And he was ready. Their reprieve ended abruptly. The faint hum of a car engine, almost imperceptible at first, grew steadily louder. Dominic's eyes narrowed. He had taught himself to read danger, to sense it before it arrived, and this was no accident. Someone was coming for them. "Get ready," he whispered, moving instinctively toward a vantage point. Isabella mirrored his movements, silently acknowledging his command. Every muscle in her body tensed, every instinct sharpened. They had no choice but to confront what was approaching. The sound of footsteps outside the loft was deliberate, synchronized, and unnerving. Dominic's gaze swept the perimeter as he readied himself for confrontation. He could see shadows moving in the street below, operatives executing a coordinated sweep. They were professionals, and Dominic knew this wouldn't be a simple fight. This was a carefully orchestrated ambush, designed to test, intimidate, and ultimately capture or eliminate their target. Isabella's pulse quickened, but Dominic's presence was a steady anchor. He could feel her tension, the way her hands trembled slightly, and he knew that the coming moments would define their survival. Dominic's mind raced, calculating probabilities, escape routes, and defensive positions. He had faced battles like this before, yes, but never with someone he genuinely cared for at the center of the danger. Every decision carried more weight, every move bore greater consequences. He silently cursed the unknown architect behind this pursuit, knowing that whoever orchestrated it had underestimated his determination, his ruthlessness, and his ability to adapt under pressure. And Dominic was nothing if not adaptable. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light. Dominic reacted instantly, positioning himself between the threat and Isabella. The intruder paused, assessing, but Dominic's gaze was sharp, his body coiled like a spring ready to strike. The operative made a sudden move, and Dominic responded with precision, neutralizing the immediate danger with controlled force. Isabella flinched at the confrontation, her survival instinct screaming, but Dominic's calm command reassured her. "Stay close," he whispered, voice steady. She obeyed, following him through the loft's maze-like structure, every step guided by his experience and intuition. The operatives regrouped outside, realizing that Dominic and Isabella were more elusive than anticipated. Their strategy had failed to anticipate Dominic's skill, and frustration seeped through their coordinated movements. Dominic watched from the shadows as they conferred, analyzing their behavior, estimating their next move. He had learned to read people, to predict their reactions under pressure, and he was already planning the countermeasure that would ensure their continued survival. The hunt was far from over, but Dominic was confident that he could outmaneuver them, if only for a little longer. Isabella's thoughts churned as they moved through the loft, her body fatigued but her mind hyper-aware. The danger had been constant, unyielding, and every encounter reminded her of how vulnerable she truly was. Yet Dominic's presence gave her a strange, unspoken strength. She felt seen, protected, and understood in a way she hadn't experienced in years. There was a trust building between them, fragile but undeniable, rooted in shared danger and the unspoken acknowledgement that survival depended on their coordination. Hours passed with tense vigilance. Dominic and Isabella moved from one temporary safe point to another, each chosen for strategic advantage. Every moment required concentration, precision, and absolute trust in each other. Dominic's mind was a constant calculation of risk and opportunity, while Isabella's instincts complemented his strategy, allowing them to stay one step ahead of their pursuers. The danger was omnipresent, a shadow that followed them relentlessly, but Dominic's confidence and skill kept it at bay, if only temporarily. As night fell once more, Dominic and Isabella paused in a small, abandoned apartment. Dominic checked barricades, surveyed the windows, and ensured that every potential entry point was secure. Isabella, exhausted but alert, allowed herself a moment to breathe. The night had been unforgiving, testing their endurance, courage, and trust. Yet in the quiet moments between threats, there was a recognition of something more profound, an unspoken bond, a connection that had survived years of separation and re-emerged in the crucible of danger. Dominic looked at her, his eyes intense yet soft. "We've survived today," he said, voice low but firm. "Tomorrow, it will get harder. But I promise you, Isabella, I won't let them take you. Not now, not ever." She met his gaze, a mixture of fear, gratitude, and something deeper reflecting in her eyes. Words failed, but the understanding between them was clear. They were partners in survival, bound by circumstance, danger, and an unspoken connection that neither could deny. Outside, the city pulsed with indifferent life. Cars passed, lights flickered, and the night carried on, unaware of the deadly pursuit unfolding in its shadows. Dominic and Isabella knew this was only the beginning. The operatives would regroup, their strategies would evolve, and the danger would escalate. But for now, they had survived. They had navigated the first major confrontation, relied on each other, and emerged intact. And in that fragile victory, they found a moment of clarity, a shared understanding that survival required vigilance, trust, and the courage to face whatever came next. As dawn approached, Dominic made plans for the next phase. They could not stay in one place too long. The operatives were relentless, intelligent, and resourceful. Every safe house, every temporary refuge, would need to be reassessed. He knew that the coming days would test them in ways neither had anticipated. And yet, despite the danger, there was a quiet determination in both of them. They would survive, together. They had no choice. And so, as the first light of morning painted the city in muted hues, Dominic Romano and Isabella Marquez prepared for the battles ahead. The enemy was persistent, the danger was growing, and every decision carried life or death consequences. Yet amid the fear, adrenaline, and uncertainty, a bond had formed, unspoken, resilient, and undeniable. A bond that would guide them through the storms yet to come, and force both to confront truths they had long avoided. The night had tested them. The day would demand more, and the hunt was far from over. The city was a labyrinth of danger, and Dominic Romano had learned long ago that every shadow, every flickering light, and every seemingly empty street could hide a threat. But tonight, the stakes had risen to a level he had never faced before. Isabella's safety was no longer a matter of strategy alone, it had become personal. Every heartbeat, every movement, every breath reminded him that failure was not an option. The operatives hunting her had escalated their tactics, showing an intelligence and ruthlessness that rivaled his own. Dominic's mind raced as he assessed the risks, planning their next moves with the precision of a general preparing for battle. Yet amid the chaos, one thought remained constant. Isabella had to survive, and he would ensure it, no matter the cost. Isabella moved silently behind him, every nerve on edge, attuned to the slightest sound or movement. Her eyes flicked constantly to the shadows, the dark corners, and the streets below, where danger lurked in every unexpected angle. She had survived threats before, but this was unlike anything she had faced. The enemy was patient, methodical, and unrelenting, and each step forward carried the risk of discovery, ambush, or worse. Yet Dominic's presence, his unwavering focus, and his protective instinct gave her a fragile sense of security. She had learned to rely on herself, but now she was learning to rely on someone else, a man she had once thought untouchable, but who had returned to her life at precisely the right moment. The call from days earlier had set this deadly game into motion, and Dominic had followed the trail with relentless precision. Every piece of intelligence, every clue, every whisper of Isabella's movements had brought him closer to her. But the operatives were not idle. They had adapted, anticipating his moves, and now the hunt had escalated into something far more dangerous. Dominic knew that the coming confrontation would not just test their physical limits, but also their trust, their instincts, and the bond that had begun to form between them. He was determined to protect her, but he also knew that survival required more than brute force. It required cunning, strategy, and unflinching resolve. As they navigated the narrow streets, a sudden movement caught Dominic's eye. A van, black and unmarked, idled a block ahead, its engine low and menacing. He froze, signaling Isabella to duck behind a corner. The operatives had found them. Dominic's pulse quickened, but his mind remained sharp, calculating every possibility. He scanned the environment, noting exits, potential cover, and vantage points. Every decision in the next few moments would determine whether they survived. He whispered to Isabella, "Stay close. Follow my lead. Don't let them see you." Her nod was barely perceptible, but it carried the weight of unspoken trust, and together they moved as one, shadows blending seamlessly into the night. The van's doors slid open with a mechanical hiss, and 4 figures emerged, their movements coordinated and precise. Dominic recognized them immediately, not mere foot soldiers, but trained operatives, skilled in tactics, combat, and strategy. They had underestimated him once, but that mistake would not repeat. Dominic's hand rested on his sidearm, his body coiled, every muscle ready to respond. Isabella, trembling but alert, mirrored his readiness. Their lives hung in the balance, and the tension was electric, a silent storm waiting to erupt. The operatives advanced, confident in their approach, but Dominic had anticipated their strategy. He maneuvered Isabella to higher ground, positioning her behind a stack of crates, while he stepped into view, drawing attention away from her. The first operative lunged, and Dominic countered with precision, disarming and incapacitating him with swift, controlled movements. Another moved to flank, but Dominic pivoted, using the environment to his advantage, neutralizing the threat without putting Isabella in direct danger. Each movement was a calculated dance, balancing aggression with protection, strategy with instinct, and every step was executed flawlessly. Isabella watched, awe mingled with fear, as Dominic fought with controlled ferocity. She had always known him as a figure of authority, power, and ruthlessness, but now she saw a different side, one driven by care, determination, and an unshakable commitment to her survival. She realized that this man, who had once been untouchable, was now willing to risk everything for her. It was a revelation that both unsettled and comforted her, a complex mixture of emotions she couldn't fully comprehend. Yet in the midst of chaos, she found herself trusting him completely, relying on his instincts and decisions without hesitation. The operatives regrouped, realizing that Dominic was no ordinary adversary. They adapted, circling around him, attempting to cut off his escape routes, to isolate Isabella, to turn their hunt into a trap. But Dominic's mind raced faster than theirs. He analyzed their movements, predicted their intentions, and exploited their overconfidence. Every ambush was countered, every tactic anticipated, and every threat neutralized with precision. Isabella followed his lead, responding instinctively, moving in harmony with his commands. Together, they were a formidable pair, navigating the deadly game with a blend of skill, strategy, and unspoken trust. Despite the adrenaline, Dominic remained aware of the broader situation. The operatives' objective was clear: capture or eliminate Isabella. But why? What was the motivation behind such relentless pursuit? Every instinct told him that this was personal, calculated, and far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. He realized that the operatives were only the surface, the visible part of a far larger, more insidious network. The real threat remained hidden, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and Dominic knew they had to stay ahead, to anticipate every move, to survive long enough to uncover the truth. As the confrontation escalated, Dominic guided Isabella toward a narrow passage leading to a temporary refuge he had identified earlier. The operatives pursued, their frustration growing as Dominic outmaneuvered them at every turn. Each step was a test of endurance, strategy, and coordination. Dominic's mind was a constant calculation of risk, opportunity, and protection, while Isabella's instincts complemented his decisions, allowing them to navigate the deadly pursuit. The city around them became a maze of shadows, rooftops, and alleyways, each turn a potential trap, each moment a gamble with life and death. Finally, they reached the refuge, a hidden loft, secure and fortified, offering temporary reprieve. Dominic quickly assessed the environment, barricading entrances and checking exits. Isabella, exhausted but alert, allowed herself a brief moment to catch her breath. The operatives were temporarily thwarted, but Dominic knew this was only a pause, not a resolution. The danger was far from over, and the network pursuing her would not rest. Every advantage gained was temporary, and survival depended on vigilance, preparation, and unshakable resolve. In the quiet moments between threats, Dominic and Isabella shared a look that carried unspoken understanding. Words were unnecessary, their connection had deepened, forged in the crucible of shared danger, trust, and reliance. Both knew that the challenges ahead would test their limits, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Yet in that fragile moment of calm, there was recognition that they were stronger together, bound by a shared goal and the unyielding determination to survive. Dominic's mind, however, remained on the threat beyond the loft's walls. The operatives would return, smarter, more coordinated, and more dangerous. He began planning their next move, considering every option, every contingency, and every potential trap. Isabella's safety remained paramount, but he also understood that the real battle lay ahead, confronting the masterminds behind the relentless pursuit and unraveling the motives that had drawn them into this deadly game. The night had proven their resilience, but the coming confrontation would define their survival. As dawn approached, Dominic and Isabella prepared for the challenges to come. The operatives would not rest, the network of danger would grow more intricate, and every moment would demand vigilance, courage, and strategy. Yet amidst the fear and uncertainty, a bond had emerged, unspoken, resilient, and undeniable. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts, a force capable of surviving threats that neither could face alone. And so, as the city slowly woke, unaware of the deadly hunt unfolding in its shadows, Dominic Romano and Isabella Marquez braced themselves for the next phase. The enemy was relentless, the danger pervasive, and every decision carried consequences that could mean life or death. Yet through the chaos, adrenaline, and fear, a shared determination burned brightly. They would survive, they would fight, and they would confront the forces that sought to tear them apart, no matter the cost. The night had tested them. The city was indifferent, but they were not. And the storm that had begun with a single call was only growing stronger, drawing them deeper into a battle where trust, courage, and unspoken bonds would be their only weapons against the darkness closing in around them. The night had grown colder, the wind slicing through the narrow streets like a warning. Dominic Romano and Isabella Marquez moved with precision, aware that this would be the decisive confrontation. Every step, every breath, was measured, every instinct on high alert. The operatives who had pursued them for days had grown bolder, more aggressive, but Dominic's resolve was unshakable. He had anticipated this escalation, and for the first time in this deadly pursuit, he felt the faint pulse of control in the chaos. Isabella, by his side, shared in the tension, her eyes wide but determined, ready to follow his lead no matter the risk. The city around them was oblivious to the storm, unaware that two lives were about to be tested beyond anything imaginable. Dominic led her through an abandoned factory, a maze of rusted machinery and darkened corridors that offered both cover and strategic advantage. He moved with calculated steps, ensuring that Isabella remained shielded, unseen, yet close enough to act instantly. Their footsteps echoed faintly, a rhythm that blended with the distant hum of the city. Dominic's mind analyzed every detail. the distance between shadows, the timing of their movements, and the likely positions of the operatives hunting them. He knew that this night could decide everything: Isabella's life, the enemy's fate, and the bond that had grown between them through fear, trust, and relentless pursuit. Isabella's heart pounded, not just from fear but from adrenaline, anticipation, and the realization that this would not be a quiet escape. She had trusted Dominic in moments of danger before, but now the stakes were higher than ever. The enemies had proven intelligent, resourceful, and ruthless, and any misstep could be fatal. She followed Dominic without hesitation, relying on his experience, instincts, and unwavering focus. In a strange way, the terror was tempered by the trust that had grown between them, an unspoken understanding that survival depended not only on skill but on their unity, their willingness to fight as one. Suddenly, the faint sound of footsteps, heavier and more coordinated than before, echoed through the factory. Dominic froze, signaling Isabella to crouch behind a rusted piece of machinery. The operatives had found them again, their approach deliberate, calculated, and unrelenting. Dominic's gaze scanned the shadows, taking in every detail, noting the angles of attack, and planning the counter-move before the enemy had even made it. He had faced countless threats in his life, but none had tested his control, patience, and determination as intensely as protecting Isabella. Every decision carried weight, every reaction could tip the balance between life and death. The operatives moved closer, and Dominic felt the tension sharpen to a razor's edge. With a silent signal, he guided Isabella toward a narrow catwalk above the main floor, providing height, cover, and a tactical advantage. Isabella's pulse raced, but she trusted him implicitly, moving as he directed, her body tense yet responsive. Dominic positioned himself between her and the approaching threat, every muscle coiled, ready to act. The first operative entered the corridor below, scanning for movement, unaware that Dominic had anticipated the attack. With a sudden, precise strike, Dominic neutralized the operative, a fluid motion that combined speed, power, and control. Isabella flinched at the movement, but Dominic's calm assurance kept her grounded, focused, and ready. The remaining operatives paused, realizing that their approach had been anticipated. They regrouped, communicating in hushed, urgent tones, unaware that Dominic had already calculated their next move. He read their positions, predicted their intentions, and prepared for the confrontation that would decide the outcome. Every step he took was designed to protect Isabella, to eliminate the threat, and to ensure that the enemy would not anticipate the final blow. Isabella, by his side, mirrored his movements instinctively, responding to his signals and relying on her own growing sense of courage. Together, they became a seamless unit, moving with precision, strategy, and unspoken trust. The air was thick with tension as the operatives launched a coordinated attack. Dominic reacted instantly, using the environment to his advantage, creating barriers, forcing them into choke points, and systematically neutralizing the threats. The fight was brutal, fast-paced, and relentless, yet Dominic maintained control, his focus unwavering. Isabella moved with a mix of instinct and guidance, assisting where she could, her fear transformed into determination. She realized, in the midst of chaos, that her survival depended not only on Dominic's skill but on her courage, her ability to act decisively, and her willingness to confront fear head-on. One operative attempted to flank from above, but Dominic anticipated the move. With a swift maneuver, he intercepted the attack, turning the ambush into an opportunity. The operative fell back, disoriented, while Dominic pressed forward, neutralizing the threat with precision. Isabella watched, awe mingled with fear, as Dominic's calm command turned the tide. Every strike, every movement, demonstrated not just skill but a relentless determination to protect her. She felt a surge of gratitude, admiration, and an emotion she had tried to deny for years, a deep, undeniable connection to the man fighting for her life. The last operative lunged, desperate and reckless, realizing that their pursuit was failing. Dominic countered swiftly, using a combination of technique and strategy that left the attacker incapacitated. The fight was over, the immediate threat neutralized, and the factory fell silent except for the distant hum of the city outside. Dominic took a deep breath, scanning the area to ensure no other dangers remained. Isabella, trembling but alive, allowed herself a moment to exhale, realizing that they had survived the deadliest confrontation yet. The relief was palpable, yet tempered by the knowledge that the network behind these operatives remained active, watching, waiting for their next opportunity. Dominic approached Isabella, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "You're safe, for now," he said, his voice low but resolute. "But this isn't over. Whoever sent them won't give up so easily. We need to stay ahead, stay smart, and stay together." Isabella nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and an emotion she could no longer ignore. She realized that survival was no longer just about evading danger, it was about trusting Dominic, about relying on their bond, and about acknowledging the depth of her feelings, despite the fear that had defined her life for so long. They moved together through the factory, exiting into the pre-dawn streets where the city began to stir. The streets were empty, but the tension lingered. Dominic knew that the masterminds behind the pursuit were still out there, calculating their next move, and he refused to let Isabella be a pawn in their scheme. Each step they took was deliberate, every decision calculated to ensure continued safety. Isabella, by his side, felt the weight of the night's events, yet also a growing sense of trust, partnership, and connection that had emerged through shared danger and reliance. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the city, Dominic and Isabella paused in a small, secure safe house he had prepared. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the broader danger remained. Dominic surveyed the surroundings, checking every exit, barricade, and vantage point. Isabella, exhausted but alert, sat close to him, silently acknowledging the bond that had strengthened in the crucible of fear and survival. The danger had forged something between them, trust, understanding, and an unspoken promise that neither would face the coming challenges alone. Dominic spoke softly, almost to himself but audible enough for Isabella to hear. "We've made it this far, survived everything they've thrown at us, and yet, the real fight is just beginning. But whatever comes next, we face it together." Isabella's gaze met his, reflecting gratitude, fear, and a depth of emotion she had not anticipated. The trials of the past days had tested them, but they had survived, not just physically, but together, their bond reinforced by danger, trust, and an undeniable connection. The city, unaware of the night's deadly events, continued its rhythm, oblivious to the storm that had passed through its shadows. Dominic and Isabella knew that the danger would persist, but they had proven their resilience, courage, and capacity to act as one. Every challenge had brought them closer, every threat had forged a deeper connection, and every victory had strengthened their resolve. In the silence of the safe house, amidst the lingering adrenaline and exhaustion, there was a quiet certainty: they would survive, confront the dangers that remained, and emerge stronger, together. And so, as the first light of day fully illuminated the city, Dominic Romano and Isabella Marquez stood together, not as hunter and hunted, but as allies bound by survival, trust, and the unspoken promise that they would face whatever darkness lay ahead side by side. The night had tested them, danger had pursued them, and threats had risen, but they had endured. Together, they were unstoppable. Together, they were unstoppable.